Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
Okay, welcome back to part 2. I'm here speaking with Jordan. If you haven't watched part 1, I highly recommend you do. Otherwise, you might not really understand what it is we're talking about. Or don't. Just listen to this. It's up to you. I'm not your boss. Right. So, good to have you back after a quick break. We were just putting the world to rights a little bit there. But I did want to... You mentioned about sort of now what you're currently up to and you know how kind of your world's your oyster a little bit, I guess. So can you, what are you thinking? Have you made any motions towards anything? Can you talk much about some stuff?
Yeah.
Or anything?
Yeah. I can. So I basically partially exited Raymaking end of June last year. And then I intentionally took 6 months off, which... That was the intention. I was like, 6 months, I'm not going to work anything. Luckily, I'm in a fortunate situation where, I don't need to financially go get a job immediately. And I thought it was really important after 10 years at Raymaking to take a decent amount of time to sort of unwind and also take a break, right? So I went to Bali for a month, went to Cape Town for a month and kind of distanced myself from the day-to-day. And I can't emphasize enough how helpful that was. Although actually also how hard that was in terms of how many times they'll be like, yeah, I'm just having loads of coffees and people are like, I might do a bit of consulting here. And, like all these sort of weird things sort of popped up. And it was, I kind of got busy. I busied myself with busy things for a while. And I was like, my God, I've got quite intensive weeks going on. And it's like, why am I? It's not. Then it's like, stop. Because there's this old habit of like, it's sort of falling into that old habit of like, well, this is how I use my Monday to Fridays. I just fill them up, right? And I was like, no, I've got to stop doing that. Because like it was different when I was on a trip. So like when my wife and I went to Bali for a month with our daughter, it was like, okay, that sort of holiday. It felt like a holiday. So, but when I was in London and my wife's working, and it was like, I just basically ended up working. And then like, anyway, so it took me a while to kind of stop doing that, or to be a lot more conscious about what I was choosing to allocate my attention to, because there were some projects where people found out, oh, you're available. Oh, mate, could you help me with X? Or I could pay you Y. Like, and you'd be like, yeah, sure. Like, cool. And like money started coming in and you're like, cool, now I'm busy doing that project. But it's like actually not helping me figure out what I want to do. And
just distracting you in the meantime.
Yeah, it's actually straight up a distraction.
Yeah.
And I took on 1 or 2 projects that were like soul destroying, where like I got sucked into a corporate consulting gig and it was just like unbelievably painful for 2.5 months until I basically refused to talk to them anymore. Now they're very angry with me. So actually taking the time out, and the reason why it's difficult is to allow yourself guilt, not to beat yourself up about doing it, and realizing it's part of the process and realizing it's part of the value in getting us change a sense of perspective. Because if you don't properly reset, if you don't get to a point where you're actually calm and quiet, you're not able to really feel when something is getting you excited and giving you energy versus something that's draining energy. When you're so busy and there's so much stuff going on, it's just this constant high RPM. And what you need to do is like reduce your RPMs down such that when something organically ticks it up and gets you excited, you feel it and you can acknowledge it and you're conscious of it. Because ultimately, that's the kind of barometer that I try to use my life by these days. Sort of what gives me energy versus what takes away energy. And that is not just in work. It's like people. I did a friends audit over this period. Like I put everyone's down. So I shouldn't be saying this out, but literally put everyone like I hang out with, work in like personal, like on a list. And it's like, does this person give me energy or not? And like, who should I spend more of my time with, and who should I start deprioritizing time to? Because time is your most precious asset. So there was a few exercises that I did. I also I got a coach for a bit, which is really helpful to kind of talk through some of the stuff and do some exercises that I would never have done by myself. In theory, I could have. Like, she gave me some workbooks. I did the workbooks, and I was like, really insightful. The reason why I say that is that friendship audit was driven out of exercise, doing an energy audit, where I went back and looked at my entire calendar. Everything's in my calendar, Greg. Like every meeting, like the gym, like the gaps are when I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
Like everything else is like...
It sounds familiar.
So, and that's just like, if it's not my calendar, it doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. So I had the data to be able to go back in the last 12 months and do an energy audit, like literally every single calendar invite pretty much. It's like, do I remember being pumped after that meeting or that call or that activity or not? And it was really insightful for what that drove for me to be able to better decide kind of what directions I should be going, what should I prioritize and not.
But what sparked you to do this in the first place and take this approach in the first place? Was it just that introspective approach since everything has kind of got to where it was, or is that something that's been on your mind for a while?
No, it was this case of, I was conscious that I was likely not going to get this opportunity again for a while. The last time was like, I just come out of a 10-year business build. I spent the last 10 years at Raymaking. And there's this scenario of like, cool, I've got this opportunity where I'm not doing anything. I don't have a big idea that I want to pursue. And it's actually quite scary. You're kind of lost at sea. You're at this sort of crossroads of like, I'm in my 40s, I've got a child, I've got a mortgage, what the fuck am I doing in my life? And there were bad days, Greg, right? There were days I got out of bed and I was like, I'm a fucking loser. Like, why haven't I got this figured out? And it was like, oh man. But it was also an amazing opportunity to reset. And I think there was this piece of me that was very conscious around, this is it. I'm going to take, minimum 6 months, maybe even a year out. And the next time I'll be able to do that, if ever, who knows? But it's probably going to be another 5 to 10 years from now.
So you're just seizing the very fortunate opportunity you found yourself in, basically. So there's
this piece of being like, okay, I have this opportunity. How do I make the most of it? And then that's combined with, a friend of mine said something insanely wise and insanely articulate that really stuck with me. He said, Jordan, most people who change careers will find themselves at this like crossroads that you're in later in life. He said, most people fall foul where they're like a painter staring at a blank canvas. And as the days or the weeks go by, the anxiety builds up where they're like, there's nothing on the canvas. I need to paint. And so they kind of, as the anxiety builds up, they look around the room and they're like, what should I paint? Oh, there's a bowl of fruit. I'll just paint that. And then, in the to extend the metaphor into the work life, it's like, well, when you make that choice of I'm going to paint this fruit bowl, it's probably a 3 to 5 year commitment minimum of your life. And then at the end of that 3 to 5 years, you're like, I've got a fruit bowl. Like, is that really what I wanted to paint? Like, of all the things I could have painted, is that like the best thing I could have painted? And it was driven by anxiety. So the anxiety of like, there's nothing on the canvas is what kind of pushes them into like taking something. But, when you're in your 40s, like you're a senior hire if you're joining a company or you're starting a startup from like these aren't things that you go in and bang in or out of after 6 months, right? So actually the most important thing you can be doing is taking the time to really figure out what is worth your time painting, right? So setting the direction, because that direction is going to be magnified over 5-10 years. That one choice, the direction. So it is infinitely more important to make that choice right, even if it takes an extra couple of weeks, an extra couple of months to make that choice right. And that was, a friend of mine said this to me, and that kind of resonated with like, okay, I should take some time off. How do I make the most of this time? Coaching, these things that I would never normally have the time to justify. I was like, oh, why not now? Like, let's do it now. Let's give it a go. And so 6 months, huge journey, really helpful. And then sort of the culmination of that really over Christmas was, okay, how do I start applying some universal laws that I think are true to me? And those universal laws were like, basically what I came to was, I spent most of my career as a founder doing 0 to 1, starting everything from scratch. And like, I've gotten fucking good at it. Like, I've nailed that skill of how to do the first 2, 3, 4 years really, really well. The difficulty is, one, I just can't be bothered. In what I mean by that, Greg, is like the first 2 to 3 years of any startup, doesn't matter what you're building, lifestyle business, VC-backed business, doesn't matter. It's always a hustle. Yeah. There is no shortcut. You have to crawl before you walk before you run. And that's just the reality of it. And
it's a slog.
It's a slog. And, when it starts off with one of you might get to 2, you might get to 3, but you're basically doing everything. And I've got less appetite now in my 40s with a young daughter to be like, I want to do that slog again, especially because I don't have the passionate idea that's giving me the energy to take on that battle. So the concept of like, let me just ideate myself an idea and like go back to that again, like I couldn't find the energy to do it. But also there was this realization that I'm not scared of hard work, but it's more about like enjoyable work. So it was more of a case of like, actually what I realized that I found more intellectually interesting was solving problems in business that only exist once a business gets to a certain stage of maturity. And I'll give you some examples. So things like, right, how do we do some inorganic growth? How do I do some M&A? How do we internationalize into new markets? How do we talk about company culture? Because we're now actually 200 people, right? And we're going to be 500 in the next 2 years. Like, how do we actually nail that? How do I build board power? Because we're a legitimate company. I could probably get some like absolute like superstars on my board. How do I do that to increase the likelihood that we can be successful in exerting the business's will onto the market? And so those types of problems, like real strategy, like real company culture, real board building, like those things where you also have typically a bit of money you can actually invest, like, company money you can invest in, like you transition to a very different stage of like company building. I call it like firing bullets, where you can afford to make small investments. Like, let's fire that. Poof. Okay, did it work? Did it not work? Okay, didn't work. We learned something cool. And then oh, it hit the target. Wow, it really worked. Right, cool. Let's turn that bullet into a cannonball. Pump tons of money into it, scale it, grow it, like lock it in. And I love that stage where you actually have like the ability to fire like a bunch of bullets because you're not like totally resource constrained, And so those types of business solving problems only exist when you get to a certain level of maturity. And so then I kind of realized I don't want to go back to zero, which then led me to, my wife said, Jordan, you're going to play nicely because you've kind of been the founder CEO for like your businesses for like decades. Hey, would you play nicely with other people? I'm like, cool. I'm very friendly. I get on well with people. I think it'd be fine. But then, as she walked away, I was like, that's a good point.
Thought about it for longer than 5 seconds.
Yeah. That's like, it's a good point. But like, I think, persuade. I think I'd rather try and work on myself to solve that problem, because even if I might be slightly deficient in that ability to be like, look, it's not my show, I'm not the CEO. Like, maybe I can get a CEO role in a more established business, right? Maybe that's how I solve for that. But if I couldn't, I'd rather work on my ability to be a team player and less of a calling the shots or less of a pure founder role, to still deliver impact and develop and grow into that skill set, than diverting to, I've got to start from zero again.
Yeah, trying to fake a passion versus just honing a skill set. Yeah. So, but it's interesting because what you appear to have described there, whether you're aware of it or not, and maybe it's intentional, is kind of a parallel to what you want to focus on, very much as in parallel with your own journey, right?
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
So it's this, you found yourself to be at a mature part of your life, in a different position financially, et cetera, looking at some pretty existential things to have to consider and some big strategic things to consider. And it seems like the conclusion you got to is you want to work with businesses that are in a slightly more mature state, at a slightly different financial phase, and addressing some bigger existential and strategic crossroads. So it's interesting that there's a parallel. I just sort of noticed that there's a parallel there. That was kind of that appears to be where you've ended up on. So it must be that journey you've been on of thinking about all these things has clearly catalyzed quite well, because now you've come to a pretty harmonious place in a way. Do you know what I mean?
No, it is, and it feels that way. The final layer I put onto this comes back to something we were discussing in part one, which is like, how do I leverage my compounded interest?
Right.
Because the other thing is, I want to be smart about this, which is I want to be able to have an increased probability that I'm really going to win on this next game, whatever game I choose to play, than, having to learn it all from scratch again, right? And so there was this other piece of like, okay, I want to work in a business of, a certain size, so say 40, 50, 60 million revenue. I want to be part of the senior leadership team, ideally the CEO, but basically part of the senior leadership to execute like real strategic stuff. And more importantly, be able to leverage some skill sets that I've compounded, whether it's network, whether it's credibility, whether it's specific domain knowledge, specific things where I think I can actually bring a bit of a competitive edge to this role than just being like, oh, I'm generally quite smart and quite hardworking, you know? And that, given the variety of what I've been doing, took me a while to realize how I would do that. So I basically spent the last 14 years pretty much running one company builder or another. I'm actually freaking good at running that model. But what I kind of found out just by accident, actually, a bit fortuitous, that there are other versions of that existed that I wasn't really aware of. So, and this because they're not using the same terminology as the startup world. So I met some guys that worked in beauty who were like, oh, we've got this brands platform. I was like, what's a brands platform? And they're like, oh, and they basically described it to me. And I'm like, that's a startup studio. So basically they just, they own a portfolio of different beauty brands, like, a hair care product, a body and fragrance product, whatever. They launch new products or brands into this platform. And there are a lot of sort of skill sets and some shared services that they leverage to do that. And it turns out there's a few of these businesses that do that. None of them call themselves a company builder. None of them call themselves a startup studio or a venture builder or a venture studio.
I found out about this to do with big supermarkets as well recently. With someone we had on the show who helps with direct to consumer products, startups. They're an investor into them, and I didn't know that these huge supermarkets have very similar things, what we would call a venture studio. But they do exactly the same thing. They take these independent or sort of medium-sized direct-to-consumer brands and help fuel them, or even help put them together. And same exact thing. So there must be quite a bit of this happening.
Yeah. So there's this weird piece where I basically found other flavors of this skill set that I've compounded at, which I can apply.
Right.
And it's interesting because it goes two ways. It wasn't something I was aware that they would like this. And so there's this kind of like, oh, cool. And then I'm like, oh, that's exactly what this is. But then there's this piece of having to explain to them a little bit, like, it goes two ways, why my experience or why my, a past is so relevant to what they're doing. Because it's like, sometimes it looks like we're coming from different industries. So one of them weirdly is this sort of brands platform play, and, significant business opportunities, doing 60 mil rev, try to get to 120 in the next 2 years. Another one, which is really, really intellectually interesting. I need to ensure that there's enough values fit between the key individuals involved, right? So there's other piece here, which is in my earlier days, I might have intellectually got interested by something and pursued it without kind of proper due diligence on like who you work with is way more important than what you're working on.
Yeah.
That's the reality. And in the old days, I'd be like, oh, but this is so intellectually interesting, and pay a little less attention to the marriage. Like, who am I actually marrying in this scenario?
Yeah. Led by lust, not over logic.
Yeah. Bingo, Greg. Bingo. Yeah. And exactly that. And so I'm trying not to make that mistake again. And so there's this other one, which is actually weirdly doing a venture builder off a podcast. So there's a media company that owns a couple of podcasts, predominantly podcast shows, that has insane distribution edge via those shows, but also the social assets that come with those shows, TikTok, LinkedIn, whatever, Twitter, X. And they basically approached me to talk about building a venture studio to build businesses off the back of their distribution edge. And I find it phenomenally interesting purely because, like, here's some stats for you on the podcast industry, which I found fascinating. So there are 600,000 podcasts that produce content consistently every week. There's 3.2 million podcasts globally that produce content consistently, roughly per month. So let's just assume the monthly figure. So roughly 3.2 million podcasts globally. 50% of all ad revenue or revenues in podcasts globally go to 10 shows, right? And so the Joe Rogans,
I'm trying to be one of them.
just hoover up. So the point being is, like, if you do the maths, Greg, I've got more likelihood of being an Olympian than I do in starting a podcast that ends up being like economically hugely successful, right? This is like winner takes all dynamic. But at the same point, I think it's a phenomenally interesting category because, half of all Americans listen to a podcast every month. That's about 140 million people just in America that listen to a podcast every single month consistently. Fuck me. And it's growing. On top of that, if I look at what advertisers are currently spending, if you just look at the top 10 shows that bring in all the money, advertisers are only spending about $2.50 per, let's call it subscriber. I think that's horrendously underfunded. I think given the effectiveness of that channel, the kind of relationships that are built by these shows with their audience, I think, advertisers should be paying or could be paying 10x that, like $25 per subscriber, and still be making a great return on that investment. And so I think there's this whole thing where I look at the category, and I think it's going to become a main like channel or media type that has so much room to grow. It's a really interesting like sunrise, not sunset industry. Like to get in now feels like it's still not too late, and it's like just plenty to play for.
Yeah.
But because it's this scenario of like, how do you get access to like being in the top 20 or the top 50? Because everything else doesn't really matter. And then this media company would give me access to that, which is phenomenally interesting. And so to be kind of part of that journey is that industry, the podcasting industry, continues to explode. Great, while also basically building startups with complete autonomy and a bunch of money to be like, I just want to build stuff with the most effective, very advantage of all time, which is distribution, right? Which is like, and we've seen things like this in other podcasts. I mean, I think there's a world where it gets better than just, like the shit influencer world of like, hey, there's this product that I love, like you should, taste so refreshing, drink. So I think, they've never been seen again. I think like there are better collabs to be done where it's less like I'm getting paid to do an ad read, and things that are data driven based on the metrics from the audience to be fully aligned, that you
a bit more integrated. Yeah,
to subset members of the audience to get them to opt in and build businesses, right? So for example, I think there are lots of weirdly great SaaS businesses to be built of this.
Yeah,
right? In the
100%.
sense that, if you've got a bunch of founders listening to your podcast, and you had like a great AI productivity tool, it right now is probably in the sea of like 30 other competitors doing that thing. Let's just take something like 11 Labs, which is like, text to voice. It's like, while there's a bunch of startups that are doing exactly that, text to voice, it's not that complicated really, but it's like, if you have the distribution edge, and it's like, cool, if I get a couple of thousand people paying a SaaS license, I've got a great lifestyle business overnight. Profitability. Boom.
Speaking of which, this episode is sponsored by Huel. No, it's not. But no, it is a very, obviously it's very relevant thing to be talking about right now on this show. And it is hugely interesting. And I think I've been thinking about a lot of along the similar lines for the last sort of year or so. We've got to a stage of, great viewership, really loyal and engaged fan base and stuff like that. We've got like 80. It turns out on Apple alone, we've got because I ignored these metrics for ages because I couldn't log in for like the past 9 months or whatever. And then I've got in and I'm like, wait a minute, this is actually our leading platform. And it's like 80% in the United States, whereas YouTube is 50-50 UK, US, and like average listens of like 25,000 and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, okay. So we have got a really strong presence in the States. And I didn't realize that. I thought it was fairly evenly split, and it is predominantly founders. So it's like, okay, what do they want? So now we're really ramping up when it comes to the sponsorships. And I agree with you. I think it would be really, I want to engage with those early to middle stage start like SaaS businesses and things like that who have great products from a B2B perspective that makes it, it's a very unique position for a podcast to be in. We're used to seeing stuff on YouTube which is direct to consumer ads and all that. Like it might be a place for some, but for the most part it's like, what about these tools? We had a sponsorship for example recently with Deal, DWEL.
They're great.
We had a great one then. Potentially there's one with HubSpot coming up and all. Okay, these are the big players, but what about these others? And I've been speaking to some for the rest of this season. And this is going to have an ad in it at some point. Don't know what it's going to be when it comes out. It'll be something. Maybe one of these we're talking about, but I'm directly speaking to these slightly earlier stage businesses that haven't really thought about this as a distribution channel. I'm like, this is great. Like, this is your customer base. They're here. Speak to them.
Totally. And I think the way this is a somewhat muddy analogy, but I think it paints a good picture, which is
Sorry to interrupt this conversation, but I have a quick message. So one of the biggest challenges I hear from founders, product leaders, and fast-scaling startups quite consistently is that they have a vision for the product, but they can't just build it fast enough. Hiring engineers takes a very long time. Managing an in-house team can be very expensive, and working with agencies can lead to less than desirable results a lot of the time. So a lot of the startups, best startups in the world, are currently partnering with today's sponsor, AppUnite. They're not just another dev shop, they're a product development powerhouse. Their team embeds with yours, defines how their work can positively impact your product or business metrics, and build high-performing apps that scale. Whether it's in fintech, health tech, or SaaS, they don't just write code, they co-create products that grow businesses. So if you're an early stage startup and you're tired of the delays, the bad code, or agencies that just don't get it, check out appunite.com/grow, or use the QR code on screen and you can book a chat with them, tell them we sent you, and they'll look after you and set you on the right path. That's appunite.com/grow, or scan the QR code on screen and they should be able to help you out. And thank you, AppUnite, for sponsoring today's episode. Let's get back to it.
You take some of these celebrities, right, who've launched their own actual brands where they own equity, and it's a fundamentally different game. So you take someone like Conor McGregor, no doubt the most famous, if not the most, like the best UFC fighter of all time. What a celebrity. Now got himself to Hollywood. He's got on a few films. Like, the guy is as good as they come. He made more money from his whiskey brand, Papa 12, than he ever did in anything else combined. Hundreds of millions from his equity stake in Proper 12, right? And it's like, Ryan Reynolds, how much money did he make through Aviation Gin, right? And he's just the face of it, to put the point, but he owned
That's
equity.
leveraging brand.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And we see this in the celebrity sense, but it's the same scenario for like a podcast show, which is like, yeah, you can get paid advertising revenue, which is to do read and do a post, or you can be more conscious about what you're taking and taking an equity slice or building something from scratch where you have ownership stake, even if other people are doing the execution, whether it's the product build or the service delivery, and you're more aligned, you're more passionate about it. But the truth is, that's going to give you the 1,000x return versus I've made a 500k sponsorship deal.
There's a couple of examples that spring to mind here, which you may already be aware of, but are very interesting. So game developers are a really interesting example of how they've created online personas and brands that translate into significant and meaningful revenue through like multiple revenue streams. So, like, for example, there are a lot that I follow for my son because he's into that sort of stuff, and who are YouTubers. And they basically sort of talk through game dev. This is how you do this. This is how you use Unreal Engine, blah, 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 blah. But of course, what they do is they build projects and they go, now this is up on Steam, download it, have a play. So they're actually creating these projects in order to demonstrate how to do this so you can learn. But then at the same time, the additional thing is we've just created a product. Now you can use it, you can play it. And so they end up with lots of basically portfolio building. They're building a ton of these games as part of their portfolio basically, and they might charge £2 to download it or whatever, right? But it all adds up. And then 100%. Musicians are another good example of that too, where you have like musicians who do music react videos or who maybe stream and play music and all that kind of stuff. But of course, they build that community. I mean, it's essentially a community-led go-to-market approach. And then, of course, they release something, or they collaborate with other people, or they sell courses on how to learn how to play an instrument. So it's a very similar concept, and it's not new. Like, it's been around. You've got lawyers doing it, and it's been around for a while. But I think you're right. In this space, there's not enough of that innovation going on, and I think that the creator economy versus the startup ecosystem has some interesting marriage to take place there. Which is, I'm quite bullish on the creator economy as a whole.
Yeah,
it's interesting, man. So sounds like a cool project.
I love it. I loved your phrase about the marriage between the two, because that's actually very artfully put. It's so interesting because I am really bullish on the creative economy, but it's like, I wouldn't want to be one of those creators.
Right.
It's like, I quite like my
I was about to say, nor would I, but shit, what am I doing? but Turns out I am.
But you know what I mean? It's like, I quite like getting lost in the pub and no one knowing who I am. So I just sit there and have a cheeky one before going home. But but doesn't mean I don't think it's booming and it's massive, and it's like trying to combine the two of those in a little marriage. Anyway, so that's opportunity.
The only downside I have of doing this show is that every founder I meet asks if they can come on my show. That's it. And every operator and everyone who wants to, you know what I mean? Like, everyone's, oh, do you have a spot? Do you have a spot? That's it. So far, so good.
That's like a very well-drawn path of how you solve that, like by being any VCs. You have a very polite reply that's a generic, basically, no thank you. And that's copied and pasted into like every LinkedIn message.
So what you're saying is I need to see more traction.
But that you can solve that problem. It's like, why do you have an EA in the Philippines? She just copies and pastes this messages across all my channels.
Surely AI can do that these days.
Yeah, you can. I'm sure you build like a Lindy or a gun loop to do that for you.
Default reply if under XARR.
Yeah. I get this message. Go onto LinkedIn, check their profile. Do they look big? Do they meet this criteria? If they don't, cool, default this reply.
Oh God, that would be a sorry state for VC if we went to that, but it probably is already, to be fair. Yeah. We just don't know. I mean, I had an investor meeting recently with someone, and I could have sworn they were just entering our answers into ChatGPT. Like, I could have sworn it felt that robotic. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And the response was that quick, and the feedback was that quickly provided. You know, it's like, okay.
It's kind of bananas though, because I'm using ChatGPT for freaking everything these days, and this is one of the benefits of nothing intentional. It's been a byproduct of like, obviously, basically leaving Raymaking end of June, right? So, obviously the ChatGPT moment was like 22. And then there's been like the last 2 years of just like things exploding, right? So 22, 23, 24. And so June 24, actually there was there's a whole ocean of new AI startups, AI tools, also the developments that are happening with the actual foundational models are like, they're getting like awesome, like just so much better than when they used, like, for example, I'm not sure if you ever used Deep Research or 01 for like ChatGPT. Like they can do stuff now, which is like mind-boggling. It's awesome. And so I found myself very fortunate to be in this scenario of like, okay, I've got time out. It's this rise of AI, but it's still the tip of the iceberg. I can actually just geek out. So I spent quite a lot of my time like playing with like these agentic AI like workflow builders like Gumloop and Lindy, and playing with like loads of different it's so bizarre. My wife and I track expenses. Like we have like a monthly money meeting. Like every month we just sort of sit down for an hour and we go through.
It's a very founder thing to do.
It's really helped us. But it's things that we also talk about. Things like, what do we want our rich life to be? What do we want? What financial goals for this year and stuff like this? Anything to be mindful of. But like weirdly, she's like, dude, how much are you spending on software a month? I'm like, sure, it's quite a lot, but like there's like cool shit. But like I've been spending quite a lot.
And then you've got to show her and justify it. Like,
yeah, she's like, why did you spend £800 this month on software? I was like, it's like trying some shit out. Anyway, but like it's been phenomenal because I've geeked out on a bunch of things. Now, not everything is stuck, in fairness, but like now I can't go back. Like this is like a really stupid one. But have you ever come across like Whisper or Whisper Flow, which is like the dictation one?
Yeah.
Where you like basically, you talk at it and then it writes, but it's not pure dictation. So it edits what you say to kind of better English and it formats it. So like I basically don't type anymore. And it had like a technical outage. And I literally was like, what? You want me to actually write an email? And I was like, oh no, how do I do that? And there's this like moment of actual panic, Greg. I was like, fuck, it's going to take me like 20 minutes to write that email.
That's a glimpse into the future, isn't it? Yeah.
But like, honestly, it's bizarre. And I now merge these things. My email client, which I've been using for years before they built in like the AI functionality, Superhuman. You ever use Superhuman?
No.
Oh, dude, change your life. Fucking awesome.
Okay.
Anyway, but Superhuman's been awesome for many, many years. But then post ChatGPT, they basically embedded the functionality where you pull up an email and it's read every single email you've ever received or read or written. It knows that email train and it pre-prompts like a reply. So you're like, oh, this is what and you can click on like 3 versions and just half the time you don't even have to write. You're like, okay, that one. Boom.
Oh, I need to look at this. This sounds
good. And then
good.
you can do things where you can basically put in like really shit bullet points and you select it and you press a button and it basically then drafts an email with the context of everyone who's on the email all past based on those bullet points, and it crafts it in your tone of voice. And so it gets to the point now where I just open up like this box, I dictate into it like ramble, and I press enter, and then it just drafts me this AI drafted and I'm like, send. I don't even edit it anymore. It's just like send, and I am blitzing through emails. I'm not getting many these days because guess what? I'm unemployed, Greg. But the 3 I get a day, I'm blitzing through them.
I should call this show Unemployed. Greg speaks to unemployed people unplugged, because I've had quite a few exited founders on that have said that. It's like, yeah, that's a good point, technically. But yeah, that's also, I'm going to have to look at that. But it's interesting as well, because you were saying about how you kind of deep dived into AI and just sort of, into that playground and just had a bit of a play. And this is one of the things, because this is actually what led to the realization for the startup, actually, was a similar thing. Like, as well as meeting my co-founder, is kind of playing around with this stuff and coming up with realization. And our CTO recently said something to me which kind of purely encapsulates why we're doing what we're doing, and I believe to be actually a significant problem no one's talking about in AI right now, which is, he was like, Greg, that ChatGPT just came out with their recent model yesterday or whenever it was. This was like last week or something. It's like, yesterday came out. I was like, yeah. It's like, that their underlying data is exactly the same. It's just been, it's a different UI. It's just, it's like that's a problem. Great. And because essentially this is the problem we're looking to solve. So this is the issue. But to the general consumer, it's all new. It's all fancy. So there isn't as much longevity in this stuff as maybe people, we're all imagining it's going to be able to create, it's going to do some amazing stuff in the future. I think we're being promised some stuff that maybe, but the interesting thing is the email example you just gave is an exception to that rule, because the reason why it's working is because it's learning from you. But there isn't,
it's got a feedback flywheel.
Right. But the problem with artificial intelligence, it's neither artificial nor is it intelligent.
Yeah, true. But I mean, again, if you've got a data flywheel that spins up, but just from like a productivity point of view. So there's a guy, you familiar with Sean Puri? I'm going to badger his name, Sean. It's like SHAAN, like AAN, Sean Puri in the US. Anyway, it's an SF founder.
Right.
The reason why I first came across him, he was the CEO of Monkey Inferno, which was a startup studio set up by Michael Birch, which was like the Bebo founder. And weirdly, his brother, Paul Birch, set up one in London called Makeshift years ago. Anyway, weird shit. So Sean's awesome. He's a bit of like, it's just, I wish we were friends. Anyway, he puts out this newsletter, and he was talking recently about the sort of K-shaped economy post-AI, where there's this K, and basically you have these two different arcs. And it's like, to over-exaggerate, like 80% of jobs are basically going to be like replaced with AI. Slight exaggeration, but like, basically there's a bunch of jobs that are just going to get like screwed. And then there's going to be a bunch of jobs where basically AI is going to make those individuals like 100x more productive and valuable, right? And so there's going to be this like real confluence of like winners and losers. And what he was talking about was just, and it's kind of, I read it having spent months sticking around with these tools, and now I feel vindicated. That's why I've held on to it, Greg, is I spend all these hours playing with these tools, because he basically said, the people who really get on the AI bandwagon, really get good at using it, really get actually leveraged, like become effective and efficient by it, will start basically running ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
And there'll be people that will end up getting ahead, and there'll be people that will be left behind. And there's some crazy stats where I look at this, like, having worked at a lot of corporates, these corporates have basically, paid Microsoft whatever it's probably insane amounts of money if you think about the number of seats like some of these corporates have, to basically turn on Copilot across all of their Microsoft suite, right? So from Word to Excel to Outlook, all this kind of stuff. And 75% of these employees, like Microsoft users, where Copilot is available, haven't even turned it on. So you've got 75% basically of any workforce who haven't even clicked on. Because it's weird. It's like, because of Microsoft, like I hate Microsoft software. I hate all their stack. Like, it's just shit. But because of the way they build shit stack and like their like shit architecture, it doesn't come on by default. Right? It's not like, such old systems that like, it comes up as a prompt, and then you have to press a button to turn on Copilot into these like different suite of documents. And 75% of people are ignoring it. And like, for me, I'm like, great, let people ignore it, because I'm just going to fucking jog past you. Yeah. You're going to look like you're in the slow lane, and then you're going to be on the hard corner, on like hard shoulder as I go blitzing past. But, and I do think there's this piece of like spending the time to like muck around with it, to find things that really do make you efficient and effective, is a bit of a game changer. And I've seen it already with some of the consulting projects I've done, as well as a couple of months where I'm like delivering output, I'm getting paid insane amounts of money. I'm like, dude, that's like ChatGPT. Like, it's like I've smashed together maybe 2.5, 3 tools to get the outcome. And there are little sort of hacks in there. So, all my calls now, I use, everyone uses a recorder, but I use Circleback. And one of the reasons I really like Circleback for various reasons, but one of the reasons why I like Circleback is I can download the exact transcript from every single call. And that's a game changer because I can then just copy and paste that or upload it as basically a text file into ChatGPT or Claude.
That's exactly what I do.
And I can do all my analysis on it. And the fact that if I didn't have the transcript to do that, like, that would significantly reduce the effectiveness. And so there are things like I do calls and then maybe I get around to doing the work next week. I can't remember the call. I can remember the high level call.
Right.
Just extract the transcript, pump it in, ask it a bunch of questions, tell it to give me, here's a document structure, using this transcript, write this document.
It's a huge superpower to context switching. I found, that, but like you said, to leave something like I had a couple of meetings today that from people who I first met in an initial meeting like 2 weeks ago, and it's like, okay, give me a summary. Where are we? What did I say? What smart stuff did I say that I need to carry on saying? Like stuff like that. You'd be relying entirely on yourself in order to do that, or a very messy system. Otherwise,
so the weird thing is now I look back at the world pre to this, and I was like, God, I was just a leaky bucket.
Yeah.
I kind of look back at it and gone, how many hours, probably collectively years of my life have I been in meetings or on calls where I've got like some handwritten notes at best.
But also, how many balls did you drop? How many opportunities did you miss? It's that kind of stuff.
Bananas.
I look at it in a similar way in that I look at SatNav. Like whenever I jump in the car, I'm instantly like, how did people do this before SatNav? It's the same kind of thing. It's like, really road signs, maps, that was the way we did it because there's just no way, it's, there's a reliance on it already, I think, for certain people. And it gives, like you said, a horribly distinct advantage. But this is why that K thing you mentioned, I think people are, quite fast to talk about that pretty quickly. I'm not sure if it's entirely accurate because I think
I get that.
What inevitably will happen, in my view, is that bottom line of the K that where a lot of people get replaced and so on. I think a lot of that has come from shiny new thing, way to save money, etc. From a business perspective, and these very quick and fast decisions are being made without realizing that actually the technology isn't going to be able to deliver the same level, but a group of people who are augmented by that technology can deliver way more. So we're probably going to see that K go down initially, which we already have, but then also it probably split. We'll definitely see a group still go down, and then another start. And I predict probably surpass that initial upward trend. Eventually, the augmented human is going to be way more powerful than just the strict non-augmented or the AI.
I totally buy in.
Yeah, but there's going to be a bit of lag because it's an adjustment that people need to get used to. How do I integrate this technology in my daily life as well as work life? I think there's also a lot of stuff around this from a compliance perspective no one's talking about, which is, you're using AI. Let's say you have ChatGPT. Okay, how much does it know about your work versus you and personally? And is it your personal account, your business account? There's a lot of stuff there that hasn't been figured out too, which I think is a huge opportunity for someone to come in and absolutely dominate, by the way. If they can come up with like a way of just solving for that, like, having an AI that can split between these personalities, ensure there's compliance, because I don't think the tools themselves do it well enough in their current form, like enterprise versions or whatever. It's not enough, you also want some bleed because actually your employees can come up with great ideas outside of working hours. So let them speak to their AI all the time. You know what I mean? So there's lots of stuff there.
No, totally. There's, it's bizarre because it's like, I look back on it now, there's loads of startups now which are like massive that are basically doing enterprise knowledge management where they're basically building eventually like huge AI queryable wikis on like unstructured and structured data that exists within a corporate, right? So like all your PowerPoint decks, all your emails, all your like Salesforce data, like all gets put into like essentially a custom built queryable AI for that corporate, that organization. And then you can basically pop up with a question and it uses, typically these days, they use like RAG systems and vector databases to basically do contextual answering of that. So it's giving you real data. So it's not just like, the problem is with Gen AI is like, you don't want it to generate new content, which is like, I don't want you to use your past learning to then like probabilistically come up with like a hallucination. I want you to basically be like, cool, go get the underlying data and here are the sources. It appears in these documents and here's a summary.
Right, be a librarian, not a poet.
Yeah,
basically.
100%.
Yeah.
So I've been seeing some of that stuff that's hitting the enterprise world, and there's some big players doing that. But it's like, that's probably working now. A lot of the other stuff isn't working, but that's like step one. You know what I mean? It's like the low-hanging fruit of like, how do we just not get everything lost in a Google Drive?
Well, see, we're on step 2 already at my company. So we're looking at skills in exactly the same way you're talking about. Nice. We're looking at skill, human skill. That for me is the currency of the future.
So how are you thinking about implementing that stuff now?
Well, I mean, without going off on too much of a tangent and being too self-indulgent, it's about developing an infrastructure, but you have to be smart about it. There needs to be value that's delivered in some form of HR or future of work tech initially, so that there's immediate ROI on just wanting to gather that data in the first place. So there's immediate value there. That's what we've developed, and then from there, future proofing. Right? It's like because if you have that skills data, well, then you can onboard new starters quicker. You can increase tenure. Right. You can provide learning and development in a much more reasonable fashion. You can disseminate knowledge, you can share best practice. You can, you get one employee and they're with you for life because that skill set remains in the organization. It doesn't disappear when they do, so that, it's got to be in phases, and, we're kind of developing a pretty unique structure to that, but
that's kind of cool. So have you ever come across Mr. Beast, Jimmy? You ever heard him talk about cloning himself?
Yes. Yeah.
I love this shit. The way he's like, oh yeah, in the beginning, like, I was the bottleneck to growing the business. I was like, how do I just get someone to do what I do? And, his extreme version was basically like, I'm going to get some guy to live with me and follow me around 24/7 for like basically a year. And then it's just like, just in the course of doing stuff, they're just going to get exposure to how I like make decisions, what I'm doing. And then he was like, he talked about like cloning himself. And I just remember being like, damn, that's interesting. Like as a it's not, I would never have thought about that, right? It's like, why have I never thought about that? I've always been the bottleneck, and it's like, but then he was like, you been saying like, how do you get the clones to clone themselves, right? So it's like, it might be really painful to do that for like the first 1 or 2, but then those 2, or those like 1 or 2 can then do like 2 or 3 themselves,
Well, this is the dilemma. So, and why my co-founder is his background is in education, because if there's an education piece here, it's one thing to teach a student, it's another thing to teach a future teacher. They're two very different things. And so in that example with Mr. Beast, and this is also a bottleneck for business as a whole. When you think about it, when you think of departments, teams, organizations, you're constantly trying to prioritize between teaching in order to get to execute a specific job or function really, really well, and teaching for future proofing in order to teach the next generation of teachers. And this is a really difficult thing to balance. And I think it's a huge opportunity for AI, because if that's where AI can essentially flourish, but you need to give it the right data. And it's not just from an organizational perspective too, but look at it from every perspective, like robotics, for example. Same exact problem. Like you can program a robot to do a very specific skill, but does it have the capacity to reason, to learn, and to teach others? No, that's different. You need to teach it in the same way that we teach humans, skill by skill.
So do you think there'll be internally within an organization, let's call it, for want of a better phrase, AI teacher bot? So
AI coaching.
Cool. So you basically have a new employee or a new starter coming into a function, and they're completely onboarded by basically this AI program, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, either completely or partly, but and of course, as it's doing that, it's also because the other side of it that's really important is that, and we had a great conversation about this when we had a team outing recently, and we were all discussing it. And my co-founder mentioned, one thing that he learned from his years, 20 odd years in teaching secondary school kids, is that every kid learns differently. We all know this, right? Some are more visual learners, some are more practical, And the problem with the education system is it just says, this is how you learn, deal with it or don't. And then as a result, we're failing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of children every year. That problem doesn't go away in adulthood. It's still the same. So we then get people in the workplace and we do the same thing. This is how we onboard people. This is how we train people. And it's the exact same problem. With AI, we have the opportunity to change that both in education and in the workplace, because if it can be tailored to that specific person, how they learn, and as it moves, and and then remember that for next time. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity there. But the problem again is, like you said, and like I mentioned a minute ago, artificial intelligence currently isn't artificial or intelligent. It is just trying to hallucinate. It's trying to be poetic, whereas you need to give it some base knowledge first. And that, I think, that first set of knowledge is give it the knowledge of how to be a great coach, how to be a great teacher. That's number one. That's step number one. And then go from there, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Love
in theory. It. Yeah. Well, anyway, look, listen, man, there's so many more things I wanted to ask you about. I didn't even get to ask you about your first startup, your exit. Like, there's so many things, but we're going to have to do it again at some point in the future. And
sure.
But that's both the blessing and the curse of this show. It's just basically one big tangent. But I've enjoyed it. Hopefully you've enjoyed it too, and hopefully those listening and watching have enjoyed it too. But I do have to let you go, because if you're a busy guy, you've got, sounds to me like, a lot of things on the horizon. So I'm going to be following very, very closely, because if whatever it is, it's going to be interesting. And especially if it's in the podcasting space, I'm going to be interested in that, obviously. So
for sure.
So yeah, man, I'll be putting your information all in the description below. But is there anything else you want to shout out? Anyone else you want to direct to, etc.?
No, I'm all good. Hope this has been helpful. It's been fun, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's been
I
awesome.
hope it's been fun for your audience.
Well, look, I've learned a lot. That's all I care about. Hopefully they have too. I care about you guys too. I'm joking, especially the 80% of the audience being American. I love you. Just in case you didn't understand sarcasm, that's how we do it in the UK. Cool. Well, listen, man, it's been great having you on, and hopefully we'll catch up very, very soon. Probably at a Rare Founders event or something, I imagine, something like that. So yeah. All right.
I appreciate it, Greg. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Please like and subscribe. Or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.